Okay, so now we're all recording. So first, I'd like to introduce March Gallagher, who, as many of you know, has been elected Ulster County Comptroller twice. And in that role, she has identified millions of dollars in savings and revenue enhancements. March's family has 3 Main Street businesses operating in New Paltz, Saugerties, and Woodstocks, and she lives in Rosendale with her partner, kids, and parents next door. And in her role as comptroller, March spearheaded this effort to generate the report. And on the advisory board was also Rashida Tyler, who has a master's of public administration and a master's of Africana studies from SUNY Albany, is the YMCA's associate director of outreach and program development and the founder of the Real Kingston Tenants Union, where she works to secure affordable housing for all. Additionally, she's a board member of Citizen Action, and she was awarded the 2022 Dutchess County Regional Chamber of Commerce 40 Under 40 Award, bestowed on 40 people under the age of 40 who demonstrate a strong commitment to the Hudson Valley. She was instrumental in producing the Ulster County Racial Equity Report. And finally, Daphne, last but not least, Daphne De Jesus, I hope I said that right, grew up in a biracial first-generation Filipino and Puerto Rican household, rife with most of the disparities that we will look at in this report. She worked closely with March in the County Comptroller's Office for the last 2.5 years and just completed her 3-year term serving on the Ontario Board of Education. She also served on the Town of Olive's Community Police Task Force, as well as served as the Town of Olive's Project Resilience Coordinator during the pandemic. She did a lot of research in partnership with March on this report and also helped with the layout, editing, and the social media. And with that, I am really excited to welcome these 3 amazing individuals to talk about this report and the process, and I will hand it over to you all.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Nejla. March Gallagher, I'm going to kick it off, and then I'm going to turn it over to Daphne and Rashida at certain points during this presentation, but we really want to extend a special thank you to the Diversity and Party Building Committee of the Democratic Committee and to Nejla for putting this together. This is a great opportunity for us to share our work. And a lot of times, you know, you put something together like this and then it just does not get the reach that you hope that it does. I'm going to use an example. The Daily Freeman did not cover the release of this report, and we were, you know, quite saddened by that, especially since we released it in advance of Juneteenth. And we were hoping that they would be able to, you know, let the public know, let people in Ulster County know. So we really welcome this opportunity. We greatly appreciate your willingness to give us this opportunity to share. I want to note that Manuel Blas was going to join us today, and we in fact revised all the posters to include his participation, and then at the last minute something came up and he is not able to be here. I want to extend his deepest apology, and he says he'll catch us on the next one. So we may present this report several times in different forums, and you may see us sharing it again. So so thank you again. I'm going to share my screen, Nejla, and then I'll advance the PowerPoint. Is that good? Yeah. Let's go here. And I will not be able to see you while I'm doing this, I think. So just be aware that I'm going to be looking at the PowerPoint as we go along. So
okay, I'll watch for people.
Yeah, terrific. Thanks so much. So as Nejla noted, you know, this report was really modeled after a similar report that the Nassau County Comptroller's Office issued in 2018. And I had become aware of that report because I was working in philanthropy, and the report in Nassau County had such a tremendous impact in Nassau, particularly I think on the philanthropic community, but somewhat on county government, where people were just, I think, taken aback to see all the statistics and the indicators in one place. So we kind of knew from the beginning, and Daphne, who's inside our office, she and I had been talking like, this is something that we really want to pursue. It actually was a couple of, I want to say 2 years worth of work total, you know, one conceptualizing it, then reaching out to advisors and convening with them. So it was a pretty extensive time period of effort, and we're happy that we were able to provide it in 2022. So we want to turn it over to, let me just say something about our advisory board. We have a terrific advisory board. They're named at the end of this report. We really made an effort from the outset that we needed to involve Black and Brown advisors on what indicators were most important. And they met several times, as well as reviewed, not only like lists of indicators, but how indicators were being presented. Like, here's the data, what do you guys think? And not everybody responded on every data point. We had people chime in on particular things they cared about, but we did get a lot of feedback on what indicators were important and what indicators were less important and could be removed from the report. So we're really appreciative of the work that was done through the advisors. I'm sorry I don't have them on this slide. They're at the end. You'll see their names. And you're welcome to get it online. I'm going to pass it over to Daphne to talk about some of our background and issues. Daphne, you might be muted. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I just took it off. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. We're going to start off with the background issues and history on this report. To start off, colonizers of New York came to land that had already had a substantial indigenous population. And the land we are on, now called Ulster County, occupies the lands of the Esopus Munsee, Minisink Munsee, also known as the Lenape, and the indigenous people to whom the land belongs. This was acquired through several treaties, and today Ulster County is less than 1% Native American. I think it's really important to note that there's not a whole lot of history. I'm in a very lucky place where we're in the county building and I have access to the archives. I have access to a wonderful archivist, Taylor Bruck, who's on the call. Hi, Taylor. Shout out to him. And there's a lot of history that I can access, but yet, even in some pretty lengthy conversations with Taylor and a couple of other indigenous historians in the area, there's not accuracy in records. So part of it is that we found there were only 35 people or so of indigenous heritage who were recorded as being killed during some of these acquirements, you could say. So that can't be. So right there, we're already encountering disparities. And then when you introduce the history of slavery into Ulster County and the United States in general, but into Ulster County, the 1790 census showed 2,807 enslaved people. Voting rights continued to be based on property ownership until the 15th Amendment to the Constitution in 1870. So even though there was full emancipation in 1827, there wasn't that amendment until 1870. Free slaves still continued to work on our infrastructure in Ulster County and in the Northeast. But as we can see from this picture, they still did not have appropriate accommodations and way of living. So that's that. Census statistics, 77.9% of Ulster County, and this is from 2020, are white. 8.8% are 2 or more races. 6.1% are Black. 4.5% are some other race, and 2.1% are Asian. 0.5% are Indigenous or Alaskan Natives. However, 11.6% are Hispanic and 88.4% total are non-Hispanic. I don't know if everybody understands the difference there and why we separated it, but according to federal statistics, race and Hispanic origin are 2 separate concepts. So there, sometimes in the report, it will be a different statistic compared to Black Hispanics. There's there are people who can be Hispanic, but not necessarily Black, and vice versa. And then capitalizing on why white and brown aren't capitalized. So because Black people were taken from Africa and to this day don't really have any way of knowing exactly what town or country or region even they came from, as a sign of respect and just acknowledging that these people were taken. Black is usually capitalized, and that pretty much goes across the board. That's not our construct. That's even a federal construct that is acknowledged. So people who are white can usually trace their heritage back to being Irish or German or Dutch or whatever that might be. So that is not capitalized. And then as for brown, it covers a pretty wide spectrum of people, because you could be Hispanic or Asian like me, or you could be Middle Eastern, you could be South American, you could be indigenous, covers a wider range. So that is also not capitalized. We would just use specifics as to culture or background or country of origin. Next slide, please.
I'm not sure why it's not advancing. Hold on one second. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Oh.
Okay. So I spent a lot of time dwelling in health indicators and disparities while we were researching this. You can really go down some serious rabbit holes when it comes to health indicators. We did ask our panel what indicators mattered to them the most, or that they thought were the most impactful to Black and Brown communities here in Ulster County. We don't have a whole lot of local information. There's some Ulster County statistics, but you'll see across the board, even nationwide and statewide, it can sometimes be really tricky to get accurate information, which in itself, I will say, not being able to find medical information by race in itself is, to me, also a racist social construct. Why it's easier to find statistics on white people than it is for Black and Brown in itself made me question what is out there, and that there aren't even many racial equity reports across the state or the country. So it was really interesting to go down into the health and COVID-19 impacts. So we don't have local hospitalization rate by hospitalization data, I'm sorry, by race in Ulster County, but in New York City, Black people were hospitalized at twice the rate of white people for COVID during the Omicron wave. A lot of that is due to structural racism, dictating where people live and work, and also, which we will touch on a little bit later, what people do for a living. So we have a much higher concentration of Black and Brown people who are in the service industry, who are frontline workers, and who work in healthcare. And so they're further impacted by their exposure to COVID and environmental issues. Black New Yorkers are only 14% of the population of New York, but they comprise 29% of the hospitalizations in New York and 23% of all deaths from COVID. Hispanics represent 19% of New York State's population, but yet were 35% of hospitalizations and 23% of all deaths from COVID. There are also disparate economic impacts as a result of the pandemic. Black people represented 17% of frontline workers compared to their representation in the total workforce of only 11.9%. And they're disproportionately exposed, like I was saying, to the double impact of COVID-19 and unhealthy air quality in many of these neighborhoods that have been subjected to redlining. Air pollution has increased susceptibility to respiratory infections, as well as further impacting COVID, as well as heart disease, obesity, and diabetes, all of which you can see on this graphic are way higher than compared to white people and brown people as well. Part of the problem with this is that they will then in turn have higher rates of unemployment and lost wages, and also having to deal with things like childcare if someone is sick, or if they're laid off from work, or the list goes on and on. We all know how that went during the pandemic. Over the course of decades, policymakers have frequently chosen to place pollution sources such as highways, factories, power plants, landfills in underprivileged communities. So all the people who say not in my backyard, well, then it ends up in somebody else's backyard, except that those people are the ones who experience the disparate health issues.
Ready for the
Another,
next? Oh, go ahead.
no, just a little bit more. Another disparate issue with Black and brown populations is hepatitis C, often spread by opioid and needle sharing. And this is an interesting one that I hadn't thought about, even though this was something that I unfortunately was impacted by personally with my family. My father had a drug addiction issue. And the answer when I was a child was for him to be thrown in jail whenever something happened. So it was just a very broken way of not helping people, just getting rid of the problem and shuffling them off, and not actually getting them mental help, getting them emotional help, getting them rehab. It didn't really become an issue until white people started having opioid addiction issues. And since then, it's now been shifted from being an issue with criminal justice, it's been shifted to a public health issue. But there are much higher rates in the Black and brown populations for that, as well as Black maternal morbidity, which is through the roof, 2.3 times higher than white women, and Hispanic maternal morbidity on the chart here is also 1.7 higher, 1.7 times higher than white women. You can go to the next slide, please.
I did it.
So education indicators, this is another interesting one, not the easiest of indicators to find, but everybody felt on the panel that this was a really important thing to look at. I know serving on the Ontario Board of Ed, it was surprising, but yet also not surprising. And this isn't anything that's a problem in any one particular school. This is just across the board. So we explored the rates of high school graduation, and only 87% of Black students and 81% of Hispanic students graduated high school, compared to 90% of white students. They're also disproportionately overrepresented in suspensions in every school district in Ulster County. So you can see here in Saugerties, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. It's something that hopefully, with each superintendent, with each administration, trickling on down, can be worked on. And my intention with March is we're getting this report published, and that we will send it to each superintendent in Ulster County, and also to libraries to share this information for anybody who is interested. Furthermore, Black students who pursue a college education are more likely to take on debt than white and Hispanic college students. 50.77% of Blacks utilize student loans compared to 40.16% of white people and 30.7% of Hispanics, which is troubling when you compare it to the regional bachelor's degree rates. So 56% of Asian students achieve a bachelor's degree, 34% of white students, 22% of Black students, and 20% of Hispanics. Black and brown students in general incur a lot more school debt than white and Asian students. 4 years after graduation, Black graduates have nearly $25,000 more student loan debt than white students. So, you know, if we want to truly be fair in how we try and promote this issue, there just has to be more conversation around elevating students of color to help them level the playing field and get ahead, get out of these cyclical, unfortunate numbers. We can go on to the next, and it is Rashida's turn.
Hey, thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? Awesome. Sorry, I was having some internet problems. So I'll be presenting on the criminal justice system and the racial disparities within that. I know when I set out and I was at the University at Albany and Raise the Age was coming about, it had been a long fight, but 2016, 17, those were the years that it was really coming into fruition of being a law, and a lot of interest was being paid to the data and the statistics around incarceration and the disproportionate number of African Americans who are incarcerated and people of color who are incarcerated in the United States. The data at that level was very macro. It looked at national, it looked at state. It was very difficult to get local level data that was disaggregated by race and age and gender. So this report really, I think, helps us boil down a snapshot of what it's like in Ulster County for Black and brown populations in interacting with the criminal justice system. So Black youth are overrepresented in the in the criminal justice population. They make up only about 9% of all youth in Ulster County, yet they make up 33% of all juvenile offenders, 18% of all of those on probation, 24% of those involved in family court proceedings, and 26% of all of those on probation intake. We know nationally that African Americans and other groups tend to commit crimes at about the same rate. It's a matter of policing where police and resources are, and again, how that expresses itself in disproportionate and disproportionality. So you can see from the from the numbers and statistics that 9% of the population is African American, yet they're over almost twice as many, twice as represented in the probation system, and almost 3 times as represented in the juvenile delinquent or offender categories. So Black residents and adults make up only 7% of the population. So that was just the juvenile population. The adult population, we make up 7% of Ulster County, yet 20% of the arrests and 39% of prison sentences. Hispanic Ulster County residents were only about 9% of the population, but represent 22% of all prison sentences. And so that is significant because a jail sentence is a year and under. prison is a year and over. So those are community members who are taken out of our community for extended periods of time and are not able to contribute back into the community during this periods of imprisonment. And then we have to kind of think, what does this mean when people are involved in a criminal justice system? So there was some work in the report on the financial impacts of being engaged in the legal system. So for example, a single court fee can be hundreds of dollars, depending upon the underlying offense. And there may be a surcharge. And if you don't pay those and you can't pay those, a bench warrant may be issued. And there's all types of civil judgments and things that can really financially impact people of color, and disproportionately so. And so we can see how there's a cycle here where there may be someone who cannot afford a court fee, and then there's a bench warrant issued. And that also impacts, again, their ability and social mobility, which impacts other areas and other factors that are included in the report. So one thing that's a side note here that isn't mentioned is the number of children who are missing. In Ulster County, you know, of the, I believe it was 15 adults who were reported missing in 2020, 3 were African American, which is representing 20%. But overall, throughout New York State, the largest group for missing children are African American women, and I'm sorry, African American girls, ages 13 and older. They represent about 29.2% of the population. So we can see again how the disproportionate racial disparities in the criminal justice system are impacting African American. And again, looking at national rates, we can see that groups commit crimes at about the same rate. So it really speaks to how things are being enforced and what that means for criminal justice in Ulster County and how we're really going to address those. So I think I'm going to throw it over. I believe the next person is March.
It's funny, it just stops wanting to page down. I don't know why that is. So pardon me. I don't know. Yeah, hold on a second. I'm trying to. I have to stop sharing.
Maybe Daphne then with employment.
No, yeah, it's Daphne next. It's just that the screen is refusing to. Hold on one second. Okay, here we go. Pardon my clunky. There we go, Daphne.
Okay.
It's on you.
So wages, economy, and unemployment. Employment. So like I had said earlier, Hispanics, Black and Brown people tend to have jobs that are more service-oriented, hospitality, agriculture, construction, healthcare, frontline workers. So 18% of the total employment were Hispanics, but they were substantially overrepresented in those fields I just mentioned. Black people made up 12% of all employed workers, but they were substantially overrepresented, especially in healthcare, nursing, psychiatric, and home health aides. Thus, again, increasing their exposure to COVID and their higher rates of disparity in those areas. White people made up 78% of all employed people. However, they accounted for 97% of farmers, ranchers, and agriculture managers, whereas more Black and Brown people were workers in the fields, the people who pick the strawberries and vegetables that nobody else wants to do, but that they're willing to do. And unfortunately, again, exposing them to longer days and more health issues. because of what Black and brown people are doing for a living, they don't have the same opportunities to do their job remotely. So during the pandemic, if you're a service worker or you're a server in a restaurant, you're working in hotel or as an aide of some kind, then you're not going to be able to do your job remotely because it's hands-on. And so 35.4% of Blacks were not able to do their job remotely. 25.2% do not of Hispanics don't have the same opportunity, but 43.4% of whites do. And you can see from this graph, it's pretty startling when you compare Black and Hispanic women and their rates compared to even white women, but then when you compare it to white men, it goes even higher. So in the Mid-Hudson region, Asian and white residents had the highest median incomes at $107,100 and $77,500 respectively. And Black and Hispanic residents had the lowest median incomes at $57,500 and $65,100. Black and brown people have more, just overall have more wage disparities and cost burdens, which we're going to touch on in a minute. And the next slide.
Again, my apologies. I don't know why it refuses to advance on its own, but
this is really March's area right here with the staffing. On the next slide.
I'm trying. I'm sorry.
Nope, it's fine.
I don't know why it's I've never really had this happen before, but there's a first time for everything. Okay. Are we there? Can you see it? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
So thank you. I'm sorry for the delays, folks. And I don't know why the computer it seems like the keyboard is freezing up. But in any case, you know, what's true for the rest of the workforce is also true for Ulster County's workforce. And we were able to glean from reports that are filed with EEOC annually from the personnel department what our total population and workforce is inside of Ulster County government. I think there's a lot more work that we can do there. This is sort of a summary slide of the 2020 demographics. One ray of light, I think, from the entire report was that we did see a shift in the workforce of the county under the new county executive, whereas in 2019, 90.9% of the workforce of the county was white. That shifted to 88.4% white. So you saw a small decline there. And you saw an increase in African-American and very, very small, and also people who are two or more races, as well as Hispanic employees. When I say I think there's more that we could do, what I mean is that, first of all, we had to re-enter all this data from basically PDF documents that are screenshots of what's filed with EEOC. But what we didn't look at that I would like to look at in the future is by job title, right? So it's one thing to say, you know, that we're equalizing a little bit the workforce. It's another thing to say that we're pulling more Black and brown people into management and administrative positions. And I think that that's something that we have to look at going forward. We thought it was interesting also, you know, we looked at the last census of business, only 11% of Ulster County businesses were minority owned versus 35% statewide. Of course, that's because New York City has a much larger population of Black and brown folks. But I think this rings true for Ulster County. And we found when we reviewed the MWBE, that is the Minority and Women Owned Business Directory for the state, there were only 17 businesses registered as minority businesses with that certification in Ulster County. And from our conversations with other entrepreneurs, with Black and brown entrepreneurs inside the county, we heard time and time again that it's very, very time consuming and laborious to get the certification, and people were not really seeing the benefits of that. And I can also tell you that numerous requests to the purchasing department about MWBE certification or MWBE contracting went unanswered. It wasn't that we don't collect that information or that we don't contract with MWBEs. We literally couldn't get an answer. So that's problematic, and it's obviously something that we want to see change for the future. So I'm going to pass it to Rashida for housing.
Awesome, thank you. I'm gonna check in. Can you guys still hear me? All right.
Yes.
You know, I'll say I've been burned by Zoom before, so that's why I keep checking. So housing, this is a big area, big category. And I'll say honestly, the statistics here and the data here are something African Americans, Black and brown people in Ulster County have felt for a while, but these are kind of like the concrete numbers, and that we can say this is our experience, and we can say by this percentage and how much and quantify it. So in housing, Black and brown people, no surprise, have a harder time securing mortgage financing. 27.4% of African Americans, Blacks, were denied mortgages versus 19.2% of Hispanics and 10.9% of white residents. And, you know, this is something that trends nationally. We've seen cases in, you know, with Wells Fargo, even here in Ulster County, where, you know, cases of it's difficult for African Americans, particularly first-time home buyers, to find a mortgage financing. And so Black and brown people are disproportionately affected by food insecurity as well. So this all factors into, again, being able to afford to live here in Ulster County. Black and brown people who own homes, who even those who do own their own homes, found that their assessment burdens are heavier. So even if you get a mortgage and you're able to finance that, your housing assessment is almost 2 times what what many people believe it is worth. So I'll say, like, right now, in talking with people in Midtown Kingston, they're getting some really hefty assessments. And that is one of the more lower income areas of Kingston, but they're seeing their property values skyrocket, or their assessment skyrocket, and in consequence also their taxes. And so the report also finds that there's a greater assessment burden on moderate homes compared to higher value homes in Ulster County, which tends to impact homeowners of color. And so nationally, 12.5% of the properties really in predominantly Black census tracts have appraisal values lower than their price, compared to 7.4% of those in white tracts, leading to a gap of about 5.2%. So where Black home ownership, where Black people are able to afford home ownership and gain access to home ownership, they're still presented with disparities and with problems. In Ulster County, African American and Black and brown households spend substantially more of their household income on housing. And this is something I deal with personally every day with people here in Ulster County who are unable to afford their rent. 63% of Blacks are cost burdened, meaning that they're paying over 50% of their incomes to rent. So the to rent and housing costs. So typically you're supposed to spend about 30% of your income on housing. If you're 50% or more, you're considered severely cost burdened. And so in Ulster County, we see that number. Those numbers are really stark and huge contrast, where 63% of African Americans, 52% of Hispanics, 43% of Asians, and 36% of whites are cost burdened. So yes, there's a housing crisis, but within the housing crisis, there's a racial dynamic that is not being talked about here in Ulster County. In 2021, those applying for emergency housing 31% were African American, despite only making up about 7% of the county population. That is more than three times the number of the population. And so when I speak about and I advocate in housing, this is a reality on the ground. That I often say that we have an economic crisis that is also leading to an ethnic crisis. So economic cleansing, i.e. gentrification, leading to ethnic cleansing. Whereas Black and Brown people are being pushed out of the city and out of the county. So with that, and this is again what numbers can and do show. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to March.
Great. I just want to run over a couple of consumer issues. You know, the advisory board really felt strongly that we needed to look at things like car insurance and broadband. You can see from this slide that there has been an increase in the adoption of broadband by Black and Hispanic families. This is some of it's pre-COVID data, some of it's post-COVID data. We also were able to obtain federal data on car insurance that really showed that that Black families are paying more per car in their insurance. Now, I can't tell you that's New York State, and I want to say a couple things about the numbers and the data. We tried whenever possible to obtain data that was specific to Ulster County. If we couldn't find that, we went regional. If we couldn't find that, we went state. If we couldn't find that, we went national. But there are some statistics like the cost, you know, the unfair cost of car insurance that we wanted to include. And so you'll see some statistics that are national. And then also I want to say something about the population base. You've heard us talk about the Black population being 6 or 7%. Please recognize that each data set that we obtained had a different base year. So we had to keep changing, you know, what the actual population of the county was that we were looking at that time, you know, whether it was 2020 data or 2017 data or 2019 data, and you'll see that throughout the report. So not only are Black and Brown families paying more for housing, getting less in wages, they also may be paying a lot more for certain you know, consumer goods, like you can see here. And that stretches to FICO score. I want to bring us to generational wealth building, which is, you know, in some ways the crux of the matter. And Rashida really touched on this when she talked about mortgage opportunities for Black and Brown families. I posted a JPEG of one of the statistics of this report, which I think was mortgage denials. And someone in the community came to me and said, well, that's because those families don't have good FICO scores. Well, okay, but why is that? And really, when it comes right down to it, FICO score generation and calculation may be a racist calculation in and of itself. And we are definitely seeing families negatively impacted by FICO score. I'm just going to turn to the report for a second to note that more than half of Black Americans, that's 54%, report having a fair or poor credit score compared to only 37% of white Americans. So we have to look at all the factors that go into this generational wealth building. And we know that building housing equity has been a primary way to build family wealth. White families are twice as likely as Black families to receive an inheritance. Those inheritances are 3 times as much. Hispanic immigrants, for example, receive $2,100 less in large gifts than white families do. And this really plays out to the median wealth of white families versus Black and Hispanic families. In the data we looked at, white families had a median family wealth of $188,000, and Black families had a median family wealth of $24,100, Hispanic families $36,100. And I know we've seen anecdotal data that was even much worse than this. So this shows that all of the factors that we're talking about throughout the report go into this generational wealth building set of indicators, and it really impacts the next generation of family members, which is why you see back in the education statistics that Black and Brown students are taking on more debt. So they're starting out in a more difficult place to begin with. I'm going to pause. I want to come sort of to the end of this report, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rashida. I really want to note our advisory board and name them by name. These people really took the time and effort to review our stuff and participate. Ethan Barnett, Manuel Blas, Freddie Garcia, Kwame Holmes, Callie Jane, Rachel Marco Havens, Gregory McCullough, KT Tobin, Rashida Tyler, and Angela Urbina Medina. So special thanks to those folks for taking the time, and also to Taylor Bruck, the archivist, who helped us get some information. I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to turn it back to Nejla, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that we're able to answer. And I have a feeling this will result in a lot more work to be done in the future. Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. Virtual round of applause. I mean, just an incredible amount of information and just highlighting all these disparities and really bringing to light, work that needs to be done and things that we all need to be aware of in right here. So I'm sure there's lots of questions and we have a ton of time. So I would love to open the floor up for a few and let people ask you all what's on their mind. So anybody want to step up first? Keith, go for it.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Not that well.
Yeah.
A little louder,
A
Keith.
little bit louder,
Okay, I'll try my best. Given the health disparities in Black and Brown communities, do you know more about disabilities amongst Black and Brown individuals and institutional rates into nursing homes and long-term care facilities?
No, we do not have that information on disabilities, and that would be absolutely fascinating. I think disabled people are the largest population of underrepresented folks in the country, and there is probably a huge crossover that we're missing, and that's a really interesting point. And I also do not have nursing home data, but Keith, we did not seek out nursing home data, so this is a really interesting point, and I think that's something we'll probably go chase down now to look at. Thank you.
Thanks, Stana. Am I saying that correctly?
You are. Thank you so much for asking. I'm on the village board here in New Paltz, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on ways that those of us who are elected officials can use this data to make real change.
Terrific. I have a couple thoughts, and I'm sure Daphne and Rashida do as well. One thing that I think we all need to do is really do an internal inventory of what our own staffing and leadership is. And I think sharing that out in written form is going to be very helpful to the leadership, just so people are aware of what is the current situation. And then also procurement, is our municipalities, this includes the county, are we doing business with Black and Brown businesses? Are we making it accessible for people to do business with us? And I'll see if Rashida and Daphne want to add.
Yeah, so I'll say specifically for municipalities, I know there are ways that, say, a business that might be smaller or doesn't have the insurance requirements can partner with another business and subcontract, and there are relationships that can be created to actually help provide more opportunities for minority-owned and women-owned businesses. I think it all starts with a desire and a will. And I think that this report, and I really do have to thank March and Daphne for all of their work on this report, and then bringing in a board of community advisors, because there is a data desert, and when there is a lack of information, that can lead to a lot of anecdotal evidence or aspirations. Like, we want to do more business with Black and Brown communities, and the numbers don't actually add up. So the data really takes it from an abstract concept of wanting inclusion to a concrete concept of seeing where that inclusion is actually occurring, and finding out ways to partner with African Americans, ways to hire, ways to encourage alternative ways of buying homes, and encouraging diversity, because there is a value in diversity that is not really discussed, I think, a lot.
Thank you so much.
I think also individually, it's important for everyone to just challenge and question societal constructs that are in place. I think it's really important to listen to people of color, and sit with your discomfort about something. If something makes you really, as a white person, I'm saying, if something makes you really uncomfortable, like it makes you taken aback, I think it's important to sit with that and really investigate why that bothers you. And we have the numbers here. This is like stone cold hard facts. There's no questioning if this is made up or a theory. These are serious numbers. So I think it's just really important to listen to people of color, elevate them, amplify their voices, and examine why these constructs are in place and believe them, because it's really disheartening when people of color choose to speak up and then are told that it's not really that. As an aside, sitting on the school board for Onteora, I had another trustee publicly tell me, I drafted an anti-racist resolution for Onteora School District, and we did eventually put it through a couple of years ago. When I spoke about my children, who one can pass for maybe white and Asian, they're both mixed. They have Black, Hispanic, white, and Asian. One can pass for maybe white and Asian. You're not really sure what she is. The other one is a little darker and looks more like she's maybe Asian and Black. And my two children are treated entirely differently in this school district. Now, to administrators' credit, I have brought that up and it has been addressed in previous years. It wasn't a problem, but when I brought it up in a public setting, I had another trustee tell me, oh, there's not a problem with that. That's not really a problem here. It's a problem everywhere. You can't tell me that it's not a problem. Listen to people of color and don't deny them their experience. We're experiencing it. So I think just doing that and rippling that out to any organizations or businesses you work with, like if you find a business that's not supporting these ideologies where we want to level the playing field, divest, like don't give them your business. If it's an organization that you don't agree or they don't have an anti-racist policy in place, ask them why. Write your school boards if they don't have those things in place for students of color, because that will protect them. That will help them get to the next level in their education and break the cycle. But if we don't do those really important things, it's just going to continue the cycle and it's never going to get better.
Thank you so much, Daphne. I really appreciate what you said.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Maybe we'll just go a few minutes over since we started 5 minutes late.
I think one of the questions I have, and I'm hoping is how do somebody get involved with the county is doing? This was a very, very good report. I was excited to hear about it. I've heard about it before today, but it was presented very well. And it sounds like there's a team of people that are involved in helping. And how would somebody who's not in the county help?
Good question. I mean, I think when we started to put together the advisory board, we started to ask other advisors, like, who do you recommend? Who should we pull in? And there are some very, prominent and well-regarded people who've done a lot of work in this area that weren't invited. I'm going to use an example of someone I absolutely, have the most tremendous respect for. That's Maud Bruce. And she's always called in to everything, and so one thought was like, it would be great to get new voices because she's been carrying the burden for so many other people. And so, Joe, we hear what you're saying and we'll continue to watch what you ask for. You may be more work on your plate, but there isn't really a great mechanism or pipeline for inclusion. And this also, I think, raises another issue, which is that when the county does, or municipalities do hire people of color, we don't create a welcoming space, and we don't create the environment where we can retain those people. So that is going to become, I think, as we continue to ramp up employment, an issue for us going forward. So I wish I had a better answer for you.
I think one area where it is helpful, it starts with school boards. I mean, a lot of people in politics have said it starts with school boards, and unfortunately, I had a very mixed experience on the Ontario School Board. There were many wonderful moments, but many that were really challenging when it came to doing the work for for this area. If your school district is not represented in the people who are making decisions, that needs to change. Like, people need to run for school board, because if you know that there's a problem, go fix it, go work in it. Like, if there's a problem in your town, go run for board, like, make sure that those policies are in place. Nobody was doing the resolution for the anti-racism that we were talking about. And it was such an important issue, obviously. And so when nobody was doing it, even though it should not always fall on people of color to take that on, I took it on, and I was like, fine, I'll write it. Here you go. Oh, what are the edits? Let's do this. Be the one who makes the change. Be the voice. And if you're not a person of color, step aside and invite people to the table. Make sure that they're being heard.
Yeah, I have to say, I totally +1 Daphne on that. Everyone has agency, everyone has capacity to help. You don't have to be an elected official. If you are, you have the extra ability to help. But if you're in your personal capacity, whether you're hiring or your own firm, take a look at who you partner with. When we talk about networking, when we talk about things, networks tend to be racially homogenous. So when people recruit for a job, they recruit within their network, but their network looks like them. So challenge yourself to go outside, broaden your network, diversify your network. So when you do have a job, or you do know of a job, you can say, well, I know this young person of color who would be great to pull in and give them that opportunity. And I want to circle back to something March said about creating supportive environments. It's not enough just to seek out people of color, because we often get into the category of being tokenized, or I've hired a Black person, a Hispanic person, whatever ethnicity, and there are no supports for that person in the organization. So that when you're talking about diverse organizations, we're not just talking about the face of it or the phenotype. We're talking about the actual structure of the organization. We're talking about the work that every employee, every person in the organization is willing to undertake to make sure that they are anti-racist, to make sure that they are creating a welcoming environment. A quick story, in 2018, I created an organization called Black Women at Work, because I was the only Black person in my environment, or in my floor, on my floor. And I reached out to sisters I had, partnership, that I had, and created this organization because there's so many other, particularly Black women of color, who are in the same circumstance. And oftentimes you are the person in the office everyone turns to for the questions about race, but you don't have anyone to turn to in the office for support yourself. And then in order to advance, you often need someone to sponsor you or to +1 you in a room. And if you don't have that kind of support system in place, it can be quite difficult to advance and to excel in your career. So do what you can, where you can, while you can.
Amazing, thank you. Justine?
Hi, it's easier to talk if my camera's off. But it wasn't really a question. It was something Daphne De Jesus said. I tried to run for school board this year. And because I'm on disability, it was put in jeopardy because you can't be in an elected like position even if it's free. So is there anything, March, government wise, that I could look in, because I want to run. I like, one, giving back to my community. I like being at the table because I like to shake it. So like I like having my voice heard, and when I'm in spaces, I'm usually the only Black one. Like, and it's heard because I'm loud. But I feel like it's not heard enough because I don't have that seat. Like, I'm on all these committees, but that's all I do is sit on these committees. Like, for me, I know that my next step is sitting on a board because I can't make like the concrete changes. They'll listen to me, quote unquote, but they're not putting it into practice, especially with Saugerties. Like, they're so so is there, like, how do I, as like a person, a Black woman, try to not lose my benefits? Because like health wise, I can't afford to lose my Medicare, but everything else like is fine if I can, so yeah.
I would love to work with you on that. That is outrageous and ridiculous. And let's talk offline. Yeah. I don't
put
have
you
the
two in
answer for you, but I'm willing to work on that problem. That is outrageous.
And I have to say, as having sat on a school board, one of the biggest problems with any school board is when parents want to run and they want to represent, especially parents of color who might not have the same advantages as white families. Like, it can be very hard to get childcare. During the pandemic, it was impossible. I mean, I had kids in my face during board meetings, like, so that's there you go, another construct where you have a medical issue that should not inhibit you or deny you your place at the table when it comes to a board of education. You still have a voice that's valuable. And I would suggest that you just don't give up and just stay sitting on those committees. That was my other recommendation. Start with the committees, but it sounds like you're already doing that. And that's just really important. To have any voice of color in these school boards is so important right now. I can't tell you how many people I tried to get to run for Onteora School District and for a few other school districts. And there's a lot of things that just, it makes it very difficult, especially when you see the numbers and how many people are frontline workers and working in healthcare. It's not a flexible schedule.
I'll say, make sure you have a network. So this is a network of friends. They can take care of your children while you're running. If you have to go to anything, I know I went to the women's campaign school at Yale, and they taught us how to campaign as women. And so that is to support one another and to create networks. So although it may not help with the legal aspect, which I totally agree with Marsh, that was horribly unfair. And I really hope that you do pursue that avenue and run for the school board. But aside from that, in running for office or anything, get yourself a network, particularly a network of women to support you, and they can help you just propel through the system.
Nejlis,
And if-
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, March. The one thing I wanted to add is one of the committees I'm on with the Office of Children and Family Services is Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility team. And accessibility, with the purpose for that is anybody with a disability should have the same opportunities as those people that don't have a disability. So there are committees and that's covered under the Act of Disability. So there is help out there, and there are people fighting.
March.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and say, since this is a committee, this was arranged under the auspices of the Diversity and Party Building Committee of the Democrats, I wanted to suggest that maybe we should do an inventory of the total Democratic committee in Ulster County and see what our numbers look like. And then and we should include disability. I think that's an excellent point, because I think disabled Ulster County people are underrepresented. And then I wanted to say one other thing, sort of as an elected official and somebody who's in the public eye a lot. I had another elected official approach me and say, feel like people are implying that I'm racist and I'm not sure what to do. And I wanted to share with all of you what I do, which is that when I am presented with something that I have done, right, that may be racist, I don't say I'm not racist, because I was raised in a white supremacist culture. My answer to that is I was raised in a white supremacist culture and I am still learning. And I want to urge all the white people on this call to be in that place where we're ready to receive feedback and recognize that we're imbued in this culture that has this crazy history, and you can't undo the racism that you have on you or in you in a single Undoing Racism workshop. This is a lifetime of effort. So I just wanted to share that with you. And thank you.
Thank you so much. I just have one quick question because I'm just curious, will this influence the collection of data, right? Like a lot of times you had to draw from other places and it didn't exist at Ulster County. Will this now influence that is being more regularly collected or paid attention to? And then my last and final one is, what can we do from here to give this more visibility, right? This has been incredible and I'm so grateful for you all to spend the time with us and outlining it, but I want everyone to hear it. I want all 78 people who signed up to be here to hear this and more and more and more. So just, we don't have to answer that now, but March, I'd love to support you in any way I can, and Daphne and Rashida to get this out further.
It definitely will influence what the county does. I think, you know, particularly on the procurement side and on the staffing side, we'll be taking more of a deep dive look into that. We could share the recording of this out to people. And Nejla, I would be happy to work with you on some sort of survey. Because this is the first time we've come together and presented this, and it's a lot of numbers. I'd love to hear what this group of people has to say about what the most impactful parts of this presentation and report are, because there may be sections that we should really focus more on and other things we should focus less on for the future. So yes, if you see other opportunities for us to present this information, we're happy to do it. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, yeah, we could definitely do a follow-up survey. And then also, I do think that we're just in the moment of reorg for the Democratic Committee, and I think that they are collecting information about committees and more in ways that they haven't in the past, to sort of understand what the makeup of committees looks like as well. So I am just so grateful to you, Daphne, Rashida, March, for this work, for just the incredible data that you brought to us and this ability to see this and then speak to it and make change in our own communities, and the words of inspiration from all of you. Thank you for your time this evening. I don't know if you want to put your contact information in the chat if anybody wants to reach out, but I won't close it for a minute and you can do that. And we'll get the recording together.
Can we unmute and clap for our great presentation?
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for everything. And we'll definitely get the recording together if I can figure out where to find it in the cloud, and then we'll get it out. So thank you.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you for hosting us. Thank you.
Thank you for adding all your personal stuff. We really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. It was very good.
Nejla will send you the PowerPoint to share.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think I saw it shared in my email too, so we can do that. But this was fantastic. I'm just really excited we did this.
So appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And bye.
Bye.
Good evening.